Inside Corcoran Prison, California's violent cell blocks. The prison built for control. There are prisons known for age. There are prisons known for size. And then there are prisons known for violence. In California, few names carry a harsher reputation than Corcoran Prison. Officially known as California State Prison, Corcoran, the facility became one of the most controversial prisons in America, associated with gang warfare, deadly force incidents, isolation units, and some of the most dangerous inmates in the state system. Built during the era of expanding incarceration, Corcoran was designed for control. But over time, it became nationally known for what happened when control failed. Yard fights, officer shootings, gang politics, segregation blocks, lawsuits, fear. Before we begin, support life behind bars by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you deeply researched stories from the world's most feared prisons. Because Corcoran was never famous for architecture. It was famous for what happened inside the walls. Where Corcoran stands. Corcoran Prison sits near the city of Corcoran in California's Central Valley. The surrounding landscape is agricultural, flat, and intensely hot in summer. That setting matters. Remote enough to separate inmates from major cities. Large enough for expansion. Economically tied to prison employment in the region. The prison opened in the late 1980s during a period when California's inmate population was rising sharply. Like many prisons built in that era, it was part of a statewide response focused heavily on capacity and security. But Corcoran quickly became something more than another facility. It became a symbol of California's toughest prison years. Why Corcoran became feared. Many prisons are dangerous because of overcrowding. Corcoran gained notoriety for concentrated violence. California's prison system during the late 20th century faced powerful gang influence, racial factionalism, and chronic overcrowding. Corcoran housed many high-risk inmates connected to those conflicts. That created explosive conditions, rival gangs in close proximity, constant tension in exercise yards, retaliation cycles, weapons fashioned from ordinary objects, pressure to align with racial or gang groups. Former inmates and reporting from the era often described an atmosphere where violence could erupt quickly and unpredictably. For many entering Corcoran, the first lesson was simple: pick a side, or be caught between them. The yard shootings controversy. No story shaped Corcoran's national image more than the controversies over use of force in prison yards during the 1990s. Federal investigations and lawsuits examined incidents where correctional officers shot inmates during fights in exercise yards. Critics alleged some inmate conflicts were allowed or manipulated before deadly force was used. Officials denied wrongdoing and argued shootings were responses to dangerous violence. These cases brought intense scrutiny. Questions emerged about use of force policy, supervision failures, whether fights were preventable, how prison culture handled violence. The controversy turned Corcoran into a national headline, not simply for inmate violence, but for allegations involving the people tasked with controlling it. Security housing units. Corcoran also became associated with high-security segregation housing. In California's prison system, security housing units, often called SHUs, were used to isolate inmates considered dangerous, gang-affiliated, or disruptive. Conditions in such units have been heavily debated for decades. Supporters argued they were necessary to separate violent leaders and protect staff and inmates. Critics argued prolonged isolation caused serious psychological harm and was overused. At Corcoran, these units became part of the prison's identity. Violence in the yard. Silence in the cell block. Two different forms of control. The inmates who made headlines. Corcoran housed some of California's most notorious inmates over the years. That included gang figures, high-profile murderers, and nationally recognized prisoners transferred for security reasons. Among the most famous was Charles Manson, who spent time in Corcoran during later years of incarceration. When famous inmates arrive, media attention follows. But celebrity inside prison changes little. Counts still happen. Doors still lock. Violence remains possible. And reputation alone offers no safety. Gang politics, isolation, and daily survival. The rules inmates learn fast. In prisons like California State Prison, Corcoran, official rules are only part of daily life. Unofficial rules can matter just as much. Where to stand, who to speak to, what table to sit at, how to respond to disrespect, what debts must be paid, which conflicts are not yours, but can become yours. Former inmates from California's high-security system often describe entering prison culture as learning a second set of laws almost immediately. Failing to understand them could bring consequences: isolation, extortion, assault, forced alignment. For many new arrivals, survival began before they ever reached a cell. It began by reading the room. Race and gang lines. California prison culture became widely known for racial and gang divisions. These divisions did not begin at Corcoran, but prisons like Corcoran often intensified them. Groups formed around race, neighborhood, street gang ties, prison gang affiliations, regional loyalty. For some inmates, joining a group offered protection. For others, it created obligations that could last years. Refusing alignment could be dangerous. Participating could be dangerous too. This is one of the hardest truths of prison life. People often navigate systems they did not create but cannot ignore. Inside Corcoran, neutrality could be difficult to maintain. The SHU, silence as control. Corcoran's security housing units represented another side of prison power. Here, movement was tightly controlled. Contact was limited. Cells were designed for separation. Depending on era and policy, inmates could spend long periods in restrictive housing due to disciplinary issues, violence risk, or alleged gang leadership roles. Critics argued prolonged isolation can cause anxiety, depression, sleep disruption, memory problems, emotional instability. Officials argued such housing prevented murders, extortion networks, and organized prison violence. The debate was larger than Corcoran. How do you control dangerous inmates without creating new forms of harm? Corcoran became one of the prisons where America argued that question in real time. Officers inside a hard place. Working in a violent prison affects staff as well as inmates. Officers in high-conflict institutions may face assault risk, constant vigilance, trauma exposure, burnout, cynicism, pressure to appear strong. Many officers perform difficult jobs professionally under stressful conditions. Others may become hardened by the environment. In closed institutions, culture matters. If leadership rewards calm professionalism, violence may reduce. If anger, retaliation, or neglect becomes normalized, conditions can deteriorate quickly. Corcoran's controversies showed that prison behavior is never only about inmates. Systems shape staff too. Heat, concrete, and tension. Corcoran's Central Valley climate added another layer to prison life. Summers in inland California can be brutally hot. Inside concrete institutions, heat can magnify irritation, fatigue, dehydration, and conflict. Researchers studying prisons have long noted that environmental stressors, temperature, noise, overcrowding, can increase tension. A small argument in comfortable conditions may fade. In punishing heat, it may escalate. At Corcoran, weather was not the main story, but it was part of the atmosphere. Concrete, crowding, and heat can become their own pressure cooker. Reputation as a weapon. Some prisons control through fences. Others control through reputation. By the 1990s and 2000s, Corcoran had become widely known inside California's prison world as a hard place. That reputation mattered. Transfers there could trigger fear. Families worried. New inmates arrived already tense. Staff worked inside a name associated with violence. Sometimes the story of a prison begins affecting people before they even enter it. Corcoran had reached that point. Fame, lawsuits, and the weight of reputation. Charles Manson and the media spotlight. When Charles Manson was housed at California State Prison, Corcoran, national media attention intensified. Manson was already one of the most infamous prisoners in America. Any transfer, health update, or disciplinary story involving him became headline material. But famous inmates often distort public perception. They create the sense that a prison is defined by celebrity offenders. In reality, Corcoran's daily life was shaped far more by thousands of ordinary inmates, officers, routines, conflicts, and policies than by one notorious name. Still, Manson's presence reinforced Corcoran's image as a destination for high-profile and difficult prisoners. Lawsuits and federal scrutiny. Corcoran's controversies did not remain inside the walls. They moved into courtrooms. Civil lawsuits, investigative journalism, and federal attention focused on allegations involving excessive force, preventable violence, and management failures. Some cases centered on the yard shootings controversies of the 1990s. Others examined broader conditions and accountability. Prison lawsuits rarely change public opinion overnight, but they create records, depositions, internal memos, policy reviews, testimony under oath. That matters because closed institutions often become visible only when forced into legal daylight. Corcoran's reputation was built partly by violence, and partly by what legal proceedings revealed afterward. Can violence be managed? After public scandals, prisons often respond with reform efforts. That can include new supervision protocols, body cameras or surveillance expansion, training changes, yard scheduling reforms, gang separation strategies, mental health programming, leadership turnover. Whether reforms succeed depends on consistency. A policy memo alone changes little. Culture changes more slowly. Corcoran, like many difficult prisons, faced the challenge of reducing violence in an environment already shaped by years of distrust. Once a prison becomes known for chaos, rebuilding order can take far longer than losing it. Aging inmates, changing prisoners. American prisons changed over time as sentences lengthened and populations aged. That meant institutions once dominated by younger, highly active inmates increasingly housed older prisoners with different needs: chronic illness, mobility issues, mental health care, end-of-life treatment. Even hard prisons are affected by demographics. A yard built for conflict may later contain men focused on survival, health, or release hearings. Corcoran's identity as a violent prison was strongest in certain eras. But prisons are not frozen in time. Their populations change. And with them, daily realities can change too. Staff under pressure. High-conflict prisons can also leave deep marks on staff. Correctional officers working in violent institutions often report stress, hypervigilance, burnout, family strain, sleep problems, emotional exhaustion. Public conversations about prisons often focus only on inmates or punishment. But institutions like Corcoran affect everyone inside them. Officers, nurses, counselors, educators, maintenance staff, chaplains. When a prison environment becomes toxic, damage rarely stays confined to one group. Why the name still hits hard. Even after reforms or changing conditions, names can outlast reality. Corcoran became one of those names in California prison culture. For some, it meant violence. For others, gang politics. For others, harsh control. That symbolic power matters. A prison with a feared reputation can shape behavior before anyone arrives. Fear begins on the transfer bus. What Corcoran reveals about California. A prison of the mass incarceration era. Corcoran was born during one of the largest prison expansion periods in American history. From the 1980s into the 2000s, California dramatically increased prison capacity as sentencing laws tightened and inmate populations surged. Facilities like California State Prison, Corcoran were products of that era. The priorities were clear: more beds, more security, faster expansion, containment of violence. But rapid growth often brought familiar problems: overcrowding, staffing strain, limited programming, escalating gang management issues. Corcoran did not create these pressures. It inherited them. The cost of building for control. When prisons are designed primarily around control, they may succeed at containment while struggling with rehabilitation. Control means locked movement, separation units, heavy surveillance, rapid response force, rigid schedules. Those tools can reduce immediate threats. But critics argue they often fail to address the causes of repeated violence: trauma, addiction, mental illness, lack of education, gang identity, hopelessness. Corcoran became a case study in a larger national question. Can a prison built to suppress violence also meaningfully transform lives? The answer remains contested. Families on the outside. Every prison sentence reaches beyond the inmate. Families of Corcoran prisoners often faced long drives across California, strict visitation rules, financial strain, and emotional uncertainty. Children grow up during sentences. Parents age during appeals. Relationships are tested by distance and institutional barriers. In remote prison locations, punishment can quietly spread outward. The incarcerated person loses freedom. The family loses normal life. This side of prison history receives less attention than riots or famous inmates, but it is often the most common reality. Reform, realignment, and changing California. California's prison system changed significantly in the 2010s and beyond. Court rulings, overcrowding pressures, sentencing reforms, and state realignment policies shifted thousands of inmates out of state prisons or changed where they served time. That broader transition affected institutions like Corcoran. Some units changed purpose. Populations shifted. Security strategies evolved. The era of endless expansion slowed. Yet older reputations remained. Prisons can change operationally faster than they change culturally. Could a new Corcoran be built today? Would California build a prison exactly like Corcoran today? Probably not in the same form. Modern debates now focus more on mental health treatment, reentry preparation, reducing solitary confinement, violence prevention through programming, cost efficiency, alternatives to incarceration. That does not mean harsh prisons have disappeared. But public expectations and legal standards have changed. Corcoran reflects a specific correctional philosophy of its time. If danger rises, build harder prisons. Today, many policymakers ask whether that approach solved enough to justify its costs. The final meaning of Corcoran. Corcoran became notorious because it concentrated many of the hardest problems of American incarceration in one place: gang conflict, overcrowding, forced controversies, isolation units, long sentences, fear as management. It was not simply a violent prison. It was a mirror of a violent penal era. And like all mirrors, it revealed more than itself. It showed what happens when a society expands punishment faster than it solves the causes of crime. That is why Corcoran still matters. Not just as a prison name, but as a warning from history. If you found this documentary valuable, support Life Behind Bars by liking the video, subscribing, and sharing it. Because some prisons contain inmates, others contain lessons. And Corcoran held both.